Okie doke, we might get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for this very exciting event, the Brisbane North Primary Health Network launch of Primary Sense. It is here. My name is Claudia Savage and I'm the project coordinator for Primary Sense Transition project here at Brisbane North Primary Health Network. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we are gathering today. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I recognize their connection to country and their role in caring for maintaining our country over thousands of years. May their wisdom and strength be with us today. So I'd like to start with some housekeeping. We will have time at the end of the webinar to answer questions. However, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, there is a question and answers section. We will not be answering them throughout. We will keep those questions and answers to the end. If they do not get answered or we are not able to answer them here tonight, I will be collating a questions and answers document, which we will be sending out to all of our attendees this evening, so you can have that resource available. The webinar will be going for 60 minutes. Tonight will be recorded and it may be used for a training resource for practices within our region. Furthermore, those who are not able to attend that registered will be able to access this recording. Once the webinar has finished, there is an evaluation which will appear on the screen to provide us with some feedback, so that would be greatly appreciated. So please keep your cameras off and mics muted throughout the webinar. Tonight we are joined by Dr Lisa Beechum, who is our guest speaker. Dr Beechum has been a Gold Coast-based GP since 1997 and sits on the Gold Coast PHN board. Dr Beechum has been using Primary Sense in her practices for over 3 years now. So in tonight's webinar, we will be going through an introduction as to what Primary Sense is. Dr Beechum will be sharing her valuable insights and practical insights from utilizing the tool. I will be discussing Brisbane North's transition to Primary Sense and what that actually looks like. And then we'll have an opportunity for question and answers. So Primary Sense. Primary Sense is a population health management, clinical decision support and data extraction tool. It is designed by GPs, data experts, and researchers. Primary Sense extracts de-identified general practice data and uses evidence-based algorithms to provide GPs with real-time medication alerts, reports, and patient care prompts. It provides general practices and primary health networks with on-demand reporting to help with population management. The original version of Primary Sense was developed and operated within the Gold Coast PHN, and it was referred to as Primary Sense version 1. Operated at the scale of a single PHN with a coverage of approximately 80 general practices and over 700 GPs across the Gold Coast region. The scaled-up version hosted on the Primary Health Insights platform was developed by the Primary Sense Integration Program and is referred to as Primary Sense version 2.0. This is operated by the lead PHN, which is the WAFA, the WA Primary Health Alliance, and on behalf of the participating 8 PHNs, which are also transitioning, this includes us, Brisbane North, Brisbane South, the Gold Coast, the Nepean Blue Mountains, Northern Sydney, Primary Health Tasmania, the Northern Territory, and as I mentioned, WAFA, which consists of 3 primary health networks. So why are we transitioning? Primary Sense gives participating PHNs a coordinated approach to extracting data and the opportunity to identify where the health services are needed and improves data and analytic capabilities. Currently, we are using PatCat as our data extraction tool, and we are transitioning to Primary Sense. All practices who currently receive NCS licenses from us will be transitioning to Primary Sense before April 30th, 2023. We are really excited to be transitioning to Primary Sense, as it includes the Johns Hopkins University ACG system, the world's leading population health and analytics software, which identifies high-risk groups and predicts future health needs to improve patient care plan. It provides real-time medication safety alerts, patient care prompts, and notifications incorporated into existing workflows, and provides a wide range of practical and clinical performance reports. It protects patients and practitioners' privacy. It provides the ability to manage consent easily and explicitly for data provision for secondary purposes down to the patient level. And it is hosted in Primary Health Insights, and all data extracted from the Primary Sense is privacy protected and securely stored and managed in Australia. I will pass on to you, Dr. Beechum. Thank you.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here to be able to talk about Primary Sense to Brisbane North PHN. As was stated, we've had it on the Gold Coast probably for about 3 years now, and it's been an amazing tool. It's really intuitive. Registrars I've given them just limited 5-minute lunchtime type consultations on Primary Sense, and they've been able to be up and running straight away and being able to utilize it in real time and being able to have a safety net for the registrar training. So it's an exciting tool. It extracts the patient's clinical history and related data for the past 5 years, but in some instances, like with hemochromatosis, we adjusted that to be the whole file that's available, because obviously that impacts on the hemochromatosis testing. It extracts new and updated data every few minutes, such that medication prompts can be really timely. So as you go to write your script, you will get a prompt around that medication risk if it exists. And it will pop up before you even go to print the script. So very useful, very timely, and an innovative tool. So it was developed with a Commonwealth Government Innovation Grant here on the Gold Coast. And it uses the evidence base of the Johns Hopkins ACG tool, which is in 20 countries and 30 years of data experience. And that's like the background architecture of the computer algorithms to be able to use coded diagnoses, medication algorithms to find high-risk patients, and being able to risk band the patient population. It's easy to use. The motto was we wanted a tool that gives prompts only if they're high value to the general practitioner or the practice nurse or practice manager. We didn't want the prompts to be so frequent that there was fatigue alert. We wanted them to be very meaningful and data filtered so that they were specific for that patient in front of you. We wanted it to be best evidence care. So as part of the development process, we sought input from across the key peak bodies like RACGP, ACRM, and pharmacy bodies. It basically does assist busy GPs to do their normal workflow, but to do it more safely and to do it with medication alerts that are meaningful and tied to filtered patient data. I must apologise. I actually am on 2 computers tonight because I had a medical appointment in Brisbane for my partner and didn't make it back to the Gold Coast. So I'm trying to run on 2 computers because mine would not hook up to the Wi-Fi where I am. So you've got to love technology. Even with a technology tool, we still had some issues tonight. So not only is it a data extraction tool, we wanted it to have multifunctionality to be better than the existing tools that were out there and to be able to be adapted to be fit for general practice use, but also fit for PHN use and also fit for improvements in the wider primary care space. So the data analysis is another functionality of Primary Sense. It cleans and maps data to the international classification systems, such as ICD-10, SNOMED, and LOINC. Basically, the algorithms had to be rewritten from the ACG tool because they were fit for purpose for USA and fit for purpose for other countries around the world, but not fit for purpose in the Australian situation due to the variations in our health system. it runs data through the evidence-based algorithms to give it that strong ACG risk stratification ability to be able to pick out various bands of the population. So we talk about risk banding. Risk banding 5 is high risk, likely to go to hospital, often an 80% chance of being hospitalized in the next 12 months. Down to a risk band 3 might be someone who is pre-diabetic and at risk of developing diabetes. So it means that no matter what you want to do in your practice or in your PHN, you can slice and dice the population and work on different fields of the population, depending on what the purpose is that you're intending to use your data for and to use your CQI type activities for. So with the Johns Hopkins ACG tool, there was a study done in the UK, and their general practice basis is really quite similar to Australia. And there was about 10 practices that were part of this study. And they looked at the frequency of referrals to ED departments in the UK. And practice X looked like they were high flyer for referrals. You know, they looked like they might need some extra education about what was appropriate to refer to ED and what wasn't appropriate to refer to ED. But by applying the ACG tool and applying that risk banding profile, they're able to relook at those practices. And in fact, practice X was one of the lowest referrals because they had a really high concentration of chronic disease patients, those really pointy end patients that you would expect to be likely to utilize hospitalized surfaces and likely to need ED provision of care. Whereas a practice, say practice A, who looked like they were a low referrer, had a very different population, and a population that actually, when you put the ACG tool across the data, showed that they were in fact a high referrer. And so I think this sort of data gives us lots of applications. I think in Australia with general practice, we know we've got a huge chronic disease catch up to do post-pandemic. So we know that there's a lot of outstanding care plans, there's a lot of outstanding health assessments, there's a lot of outstanding work to be done in general practice, and we're all a bit worried about how we're going to do that. We're also worried about the sustainability of general practice. So we're worried about, in a financial model, how can we manage to do all this work with the current state of play of general practice? As GPs, we're worried about audits. So we're worried sometimes that if we're doing too many care plans or health assessments, we might come under the focus of the PSR. So I think with our risk banding profile population, it gives us some degree of, reassurance that if we are doing care planning on our risk banding 5 and 4s and health assessments on our risk planning 5s and 4s, they are the pointy end of the population, and we should be definitely wrapping care around them. And that, you know, maybe this ACG tool will help us in some respects to feel more comfortable to be able to do those high level item numbers for our patients that do really need it. So the next slide is all about the other functionality of Decision Assist. So Decision Assist is one of the things we really wanted Primary Sense to do. We wanted to be able to help busy GPs to be able to pick up things that would allow their patients to have better outcomes of care, to avoid unnecessary admissions from medication errors, to avoid not doing pathology that is required at that particular visit. So at the moment, most of the prompts that exist in existing software are just generic prompts. So they prompt, if you've coded a diagnosis of CKD, they prompt across the whole field of medications that might be contraindicated, to the point where most GPs get fatigue alert and just ignore those medication prompts. But these prompts that we've developed in Primary Sense are bespoke prompts that take into account things like eGFR levels dropping, so kidney function levels going off, and being able to give prompts at the point of care about medication safety alerts. There's also high risk and other clinical prompts and notifications provided in a non-intrusive manner. So if a GP that doesn't usually look after that GP gets a low eGFR level for a kidney disease alert, they might not go into the file and look at the medications that that patient's on and think about stopping those medications. But when that patient comes back to have a medication prescribed, or at the point of writing a script, if an eGFR was done by someone else in the practice, you'll get a prompt straight away saying, hey, the eGFR's dropped. Do you want to rethink prescribing something like metformin for diabetes or digoxin for heart disease. There is a functionality in primary sense where things like EGFRs can be shared in a de-identified way across multiple practices. At this point, we haven't turned that functionality on, but it's something that we can consider in the future, such that if a patient's going to 5 or 6 different practices, if an EGFR is done at another practice and a doctor at a different practice goes to prescribe a medication that would be contraindicated for that low EGFR, you'll get a prompt saying, this patient had a low EGFR, do you really want to go ahead? So then you could maybe go to the My Health record and download that report if you don't have it in your existing file. It also gives prompts for high-risk medications like AZT. So if somebody's being prescribed this and they haven't had the TPMT enzymes done, it will give a prompt to make sure that that medication which is contraindicated is not prescribed. It gives prompts for things like immunization. So if you've got an antenatal patient with you and they're having their antenatal consult and they haven't had a flu shot and they haven't had a whooping cough shot and it's due, it will give a prompt in the background. So in a way, it's a way of getting more value out of the existing consults, but it's also a way of making sure that items of care aren't missed. We all know that we should be doing these things, but sometimes with patient agendas and doctor agendas and other illnesses, things get missed. So it's just that safety netting of being able to prompt us to do things in a better way. It'll prompt Indigenous vaccinations for the under 2 meningococcal patients. So it will prompt also missing pathology, things like urine tests that might be indicated for diabetics or for chronic kidney disease. So it is helping the GP with really timely decision assist information that is bespoke, a generic reminder. So the great thing about Primary Sense is it's a care planning tool. So it gives reports that highlight potential gaps in care at the patient level and the clinician level and the practice level. I don't know about your GPs, but if I've recommended something to a GP, like go ahead and do your urine test, you're diabetic, you need to have your annual urine test, in my mind, it's done. But we know that when we audit how many diabetics have had their urine ACR tests done on an annual basis, the levels are often about only 20%. And therefore, we're missing that opportunity to pick up things like kidney disease. Also, it can be that at a clinician level, we're thinking about one thing and we're not remembering to go back and check those annual blood tests. And obviously, at a practice level, you can focus on care planning to target whatever group or population you might want to work on. So if you're doing a quality improvement activity on, for instance, cardiovascular disease, you can use Primary Sense to find those patients that are missing cardiovascular medications and bring them in for cardiovascular consults to be able to reduce their risk of cardiovascular disease. It aligns interventions to the general practice business model and workflow where possible. So it definitely allows things to be done when you are busy and you might not remember to go back and check things. So for instance, I was doing a busy COVID vaccine clinic one afternoon and up popped this prompt to do a urine ACR. And it was one of my patients and I was a bit surprised they hadn't done it. But, even though I was doing one of those really quick 5-minute consults for COVID vaccines, it meant that I could just print a path form so that when they came back, I'd have that result. You can look at the download tables of your chronic disease patients in risk banding, and you can see if they have got an appointment scheduled soon, so that you could then think, okay, do I need to turn that into a longer appointment if they need care planning done? So there's lots of bespoke ways of being able to use the normal workflow to be able to work smarter and to be able to work in a more proactive way to ensure that quality care gets delivered to our patients. It will tell us if there's medications indicated and not prescribed. So when you're in the middle of seeing a patient and they have come in for something else, like maybe a flu shot, it might pop up a prompt about cardiovascular medications that are missing. For instance, if they're a high-risk cardiovascular score, the computer automatically calculates that for us and filters out a prompt that only prompts you if they are in the high risk category. So that's just some of the examples of how the care planning works. It also allows care optimization. So it delivers reports highlighting areas to improve the clinical care based on the health needs of the region, and it informs practice staff and training and education, resources and pathways. So at the click of a button, you can download a report onto your desktop that shows your practice. It shows your risk banding of the different age groups. So for me, I've got a fairly high pediatric patient population, but the pediatrics that I see is often the really higher risk band pediatrics. So kids with heart conditions or cystic fibrosis. So I've got pretty high pediatric, high risk banding patients. It helps you look at the whole practice so that you can see what sort of conditions are appearing commonly across the practice, and it compares you to the PHN in your local area so that you can see, just out of interest, how your practice population compares. And sometimes that helps you with recruiting staff. So if you had obviously a big COPD population, you might be recruiting nurses with a background experience in COPD and respiratory illnesses. When you are training your doctors, like registrars, it helps you to be able to case find. So if they're learning about CKD, you could bring in some of your CKD patients that might have items of care outstanding, like immunisations, so that the registrars could do part of that work. It helps with resources and pathways. So if you've got a new doctor starting and a doctor that's finished, you would be able to look through those tables, filter by the doctor that had finished, and be able to get the new doctor to take over the care of some of those chronic disease patients. It prompts information. So in real time, it'll give you prompts about things like the cardiovascular risk calculator and what medications should be considered for those sorts of patients. It'll tell you which of your patients, like COPD, haven't been prescribed medications. So you could do some recalls with them and maybe look at wrapping some care planning around them to help keep them out of hospital. It will look at your antenatal population that haven't had vaccinations given. So again, you could recall those patients when their flu vaccinations are indicated or their whooping cough vaccinations are indicated. And it also has a table that outlines the hemochromatosis patients that have had a high ferritin on 2 occasions or a high transferrin saturation on 1 occasion and haven't had their gene testing done. You can also look for health assessments that are indicated and not done. And you can streamline those chronic disease items like your health assessments or your GP management plans, depending on risk band stratification. So I know when we were in the thick of pandemic and we were rolling out lots of vaccinations and we had limited time to do our health assessments, we were targeting those high risk people to make sure that they were kind of first in line for the health assessments. Similarly, say you had a junior nurse starting on the journey of doing health assessments or care planning, you could target the lower end of the risk band profile. So you could target risk band 3s and 4s, like the pre-diabetics. If they had a need for those sorts of things, you could just streamline how you do divvy up the work to be done in general practice in a sensible way and an ethical way. We certainly utilised the practice report to target COVID vaccinations for the vulnerable when there was a short supply of COVID vaccines back in the thick of the pandemic. You can definitely use the practice reports for QPIP. And so depending on what topic you're working on, you can, at a click of a button, create reports and create a way of tracking the QPIP activities. I sometimes even use the reports for care optimization at a patient level. So I might use it as an educational tool. If a patient who I've been trying to get on statins or trying to get on other medications to reduce their cardiovascular risk, you know, if the prompt is sitting there as they come in, I often say, look, the computer agrees. The computer says you should think about being on a statin to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease. It definitely helps to safety net the registrars. So you can be fairly comfortable that they're getting more medication error alerts and you can go and see what prompts have been activated and acted on. And it certainly helps with safety netting when doctors leave the practice to be able to get their chronic disease patients cared for by other doctors. So the next slide outlines that it's also useful for care reviews. So it definitely does help with providing reports and dashboards on improvements in performance. And it monitors intention to treat, clinical changes and outcomes. So in a way, the tool is its own CQI. We could see that even in the thick of pandemic, the open rate for prompts was really high and the activation rate was really high. We could see that there were meaningful changes made across the practice cohort for things like increase in immunisations for flu shot for our COPD patients. And we could see that there was a definite increase in things like ordering urine ACRs to help improve the detection of CKD in patients that have got diabetes and to monitor those that do have CKD. So I think that the tool has many different layers of use, and it definitely comes down to a practice to have lunchtime meetings to be able to talk about how to use the tool. It's also really important to emphasize to our doctors and our registrars that you can't break the tool. So it's worth just having a play and just downloading what reports are there, having a little look at how you filter it. You can download a report and filter by doctor. You can download a report and filter by wristbanding. You can download a report and filter by diagnosis. And there's several different options of reports available. They take about 1 or 2 minutes to download. The first time you download them, they take a bit longer, but then usually it gets quicker as you do them. So I think that it really does help to wrap safety net around our patients and wrap safety net around the practice. It's good for clinical governance. You know, if there's a patient that has had a hemochromatosis test done and an iron screen test done and has had a suggestion on the pathology report saying that they should have a gene test, and for some reason they've fallen through the cracks and not had that actioned, that in itself is a clinical governance risk. But similarly, our diabetics, if we're not doing our urine ACR tests or medications to reduce cardiovascular risk, then again, that in itself is a clinical governance risk that we all take on, and we all need to be probably better at managing as time goes on. So the next slide. So how's it different to other extraction tools? We've outlined that it does provide reports that are one-click reports about issues that matter. It stratifies your patients so you can slice and dice them into the high-risk groups or the medium-risk groups or the low-risk groups. It uses real-time data, so it does update itself every 5 minutes or so. So you can be comfortable that the reports aren't out of date, and you can, once you've downloaded it once for the day, it'll be really quick to download it if you needed to throughout the day. It's owned and managed by Western Australia Primary Health Alliance, and Brisbane North PHN will continue to be the first point of contact for Brisbane North PHN practices using Primary Sense. So the prompts look like this. We tried to design them so they weren't too intrusive to GPs, and they pop up in the right-hand side of your screen. They're there for a few minutes, but then they will just fade away. If you manage to miss them, you can go to the taskbar on the bottom of your screen and go to prompts and go back to a prompt. Sometimes if I'm busy with a patient, I'll open it and I'll see the prompt before I call the patient in. And then I might write myself a note to remember to do something. So if they're due for a heart health check assessment, for instance, I might write next time 699 just to remind myself what to do. And then I try to remember to go back and put the action in the prompt for Primary Sense, just so we can have some CQI around how often we are responding to the prompts. They only ever contain 3 items at a time. And these have been given a clinical priority in order of appearance, so that the most important thing is at the top of the list and it goes down the list. Once you action that element, it allows a subsequent element to appear on the next prompt. And the more information section provides the rationale for the prompt and the relevant details for the GP to cross-reference. So you can click on articles, you can go to the articles. There's lots of other buttons you can see down there. There's the prompt that says prompt not meant for me. So if I'm reviewing another doctor's results because they're on holidays, I might click that prompt just to indicate that I'm not the usual GP. So that tells the algorithm to keep it there and to prompt the usual doctor next time. There's a little button that you can press that says, give me more time. So sometimes when I want the patient to see the prompt, I might hit that to make sure that it stays there so that they can see it and they can be educated with that. And there's an option to submit a comment. So sometimes if I don't think the prompt's right, I'll submit a comment to explain to the IT people why I think the prompt might need updating. So for instance, when Ozempic was being used for weight loss medication, instead of just strictly diabetes, we were getting prompts that were really meant for diabetic patients because it doesn't need a coded diagnosis of diabetes to make the computer think that this patient's a diabetic. And so by submitting a comment, we were able to say, hey, we need to update this prompt because Ozempic's being used off-label for weight loss. Similarly, when Forxiga came recently onto the market for indications for CKD and indications for heart failure without a diabetic diagnosis, I started getting some prompts that were intended to remind us not to overtreat diabetes. And so by submitting a comment, it keeps the tool up to date and relevant. So if you think there's a mistake, don't be afraid to put a submit comment in. And that's how we can all keep the tool honest and keep the tool updated and keep the tool working. And the IT team are pretty proactive to doing that. So these are some of the other prompts. So it'll tell you if you're due for your influenza vaccination. We don't turn that on at the beginning of flu season because we don't want doctor fatigue, but we turn it on probably 2 or 3 months into the flu season to then mop up those people that haven't had influenza vaccines. It tells you if you're due for a whooping cough vaccination if you're pregnant. It tells you if you're due for meningococcal vaccination if you are Indigenous and eligible for that in the under 2-year-old age group. It'll tell you if you're due for Hep A vaccination for the same Indigenous population. It'll give you a prompt to consider hemochromatosis testing. It'll give you prompts for missing cardiovascular risk medications. It'll give you prompts for if you're due for a heart health check. It'll give you prompts if the microalbumin pathology is outstanding for diabetics or CKD, and it will give it to you just at that 12-month mark. It'll tell you if your patients are due for a care plan, if they're risk band 4 or 5. So it doesn't just prompt if you've ever done a care plan for something that wasn't a high chronic disease item. It's only prompting for those in risk band 4 and 5. So those that are really likely to go to hospital. I don't know if you're like me, but if I'm stuck in a rabbit warren of people with multi-morbid chronic disease, I sometimes do forget to do my care plans because I'm so busy doing the day-to-day general care that I forget to take a step back and think about the annual care plan, which helps to keep them on the straight and narrow. It helps to make sure we're not missing items and bundles of care, and helps to make sure that we are updating things like immunizations or pathology or radiology that's outstanding. It'll prompt if somebody's due for a mental health care plan, and it will prompt if someone needs a medication review. And sometimes when it gives you those prompts for medication reviews, what we've found in our practice is it forces us to be better at tidying up those medication lists that get out of date with antibiotics and eye drops and all those sorts of things. And sometimes too, if you get a medication review prompt or one of these care plan prompts, you go back and you look at the coded diagnoses and realize sometimes they're wrong. You know, for instance, once I put in a coded diagnosis that I thought was for autism spectrum disorder, but the computer had thought it was a cardiac ASD. So it just helps you tidy up some of the coding that you could have otherwise maybe missed. And I think it's important as GPs, it's that old saying, rubbish in, rubbish out. This prompt and this tool is a bit better at filtering some of those things, but it's still only as good as the algorithms that it's fed. And it really behoves us to get better at doing our coded diagnoses and get better at tidying up our medications. And even this week, I learned that with the medications, if we are using the generic drop-down boxes, that's better than free texting the medication. It makes it easier for this tool to pick up on medication errors. So I think the more we can become better at coding, the more streamlined this tool can be, but also the more streamlined our work can be, and also the more safety netting there is. If somebody hasn't got a CKD diagnosis coded, then we're missing those opportunities sometimes to miss those medication errors that we've talked about. So the next slide is all about the medication alerts. So they were designed to complement the current medication warnings already in the prescribing software and not reinvent the wheel. And Primary Sense was designed to generate the evidence-based medication safety alerts targeted to those specific clinical situations of an individual patient at the time of prescribing by integrating both diagnosis, medications, and pathology data. So you can see this person, S. Johnson, got a Lanoxin digoxin medication alert, and it tells us that he's got possible renal impairment because he had an EGFR that was low. And it said there, a check of serum digoxin at least 6 hours post-dose and a review of patient symptoms is recommended. So that's really useful, especially when the EGFR drops and you don't know it, even though you might be the usual doctor, you might not have ordered that pathology, and vice versa. So is that safety netting around medications that are contraindicated with renal impairment and EGFR data. Next slide. So we'll go to the next slide, yeah. So medication alerts appear when the GP has the patient record open and in the clinical software they're about to prescribe a medication. So it'll pop up with those alerts. And if an alert is triggered, it appears within seconds and it's in real time before you go to print the prescription. And again, you've got those options to comment. So you can comment appropriate, I will take action. Appropriate, but I want to override. Inappropriate, wrong for this patient. Remind me again when I repeat this prescription, and not relevant to me. So we have seen that our medication prompts get a really good response rate, and we hope that continues into the future, that they are useful. And if you think that it's not relevant or it's inappropriate or wrong for that patient, just give some feedback so that the tool can be looked at to check that it is still current and still working in the way it's designed to do. So this is the reports that you can generate on your desktop. So you can see that the icon up the top is this little Primary Sense icon that has a little star, and that will be on your taskbar. And you can then just double click on that and that will load the options of the Primary Sense reports. So there's reports like benzodiazepine and substance misuse, COVID-19 vulnerable patients. So again, if there was another wave and we had to prioritize a new vaccine, we'd be able to pull those patients in first. It has a spreadsheet of pregnant patients that need vaccinations. With this, we found that some of our patients were pregnant for like 80 weeks. So again, it's a plea to complete pregnancies so that they're coded correctly. But this Primary Sense tool has been able to be programmed to assume that anyone over the age of 42 weeks is no longer pregnant. And so it only gives you those prompts if they're 42 weeks and under. The hemochromatosis one, I think, is a really good one for teaching and registrars, but also clinical governance. So it shows you all those patients that should have gene testing done if they haven't had it done. There's a diabetes mellitus table that you can download, and it includes those that are diagnosed and those that are undiagnosed. So for our patients that we're prescribing Ozempic off-label, we might see some of those on the undiagnosed list and be able to then just clear them off. It also allows you to pull up patients with moderate complexity band 3. So they might be patients that are like early diabetes or pre-diabetes with hypertension. So you might focus in on that group for the 45 to 49-year-old age group and wrap some care around them to try and help stop the evolution of diabetes. There's a table of patients with high complexity band 5 and 4 that are eligible or due care planning item numbers. So again, that allows you to pull in patients that are high risk of going to hospital and making sure that you wrap all the bundles of care around them to try and avoid hospitalizations and to keep them on the healthy path. There's a bowel and breast cancer screening table that you can pull. Chronic lung disease and asthma one. It also has any associated modifiable risk factors. So on that list, you could see COPD patients that don't have any medications prescribed for them and haven't had their flu shot. There's a cardiovascular disease risk factor table you can download. So again, you could maybe target those in the high risks for item 699, a cardiovascular check. It also allows you to pull up health assessments that are due. And again, you can risk stratify that. You can stratify that by Indigenous status. You can stratify that by doctor. With the PHN reports, it helps you look at the characteristic of the practice patient population. And for this, it's not just looking at the big 4 chronic diseases, it's looking at multiple different chronic diseases that are coded up to about 20 or 30 different diseases. There's a report you can pull for accreditation. There's a report that you can pull for a summary of practice improvements, so you can monitor change over time, and you can pull your practice data quality. And that's something that's really useful to show the registrars or younger doctors as well. The PIP-QI report comes up with the 10 measures. And again, you can pull that with a minute or two. You can pull patients missing PIP-QI or accreditation measures. And you can pull a list of patients booked with missing PIP-QI measures. There's lots of information there, so it does show you down the bottom what's new and frequently asked questions for primary sense. So if there's a new algorithm or a new change, that'll be there. Like when we were in the midst of pandemic and we wanted to be able to look at our COVID vulnerable patients and pull them in, that was a new table that we requested and were able to develop pretty quickly. There's a troubleshooting guide and technical options and support. And on the WAPA website, there is a book that you can download that does outline how to use primary sense, how to use the filter buttons, how to use the tables, and some of the QPIP data there as well. This is just an example of what the reports look like when you download it. Obviously, these don't have real patients in them, but you can see that this is the pregnancy and vaccination one. So again, that's a bit of a clinical governance one, especially if there's emerging influenza outbreaks or whooping cough outbreaks in your area. But for all patients that are pregnant, they obviously should have those vaccinations on time in the pregnancy. And it's a way of just having good clinical governance over this and being able to delegate this work either to the GPs who own the pregnant patients, or maybe setting up clinics to be able to run it in an efficient way. Primary sense is overseen nationally by the Clinical Advisory Group, and the group consists of 3 or 4 GPs, 2 clinical specialists, a cardiologist and a renal physician, representatives from RACGP, representatives from the Australian Association of Practice Management. There's also representatives from ACRIM and also representatives from APNA now, since this slide's been written, an Indigenous representative from IUE, and some university representatives as well. So Bond Uni's represented, and I think University of New South Wales. The advisory body's function is to be able to help with revising the tool and help to further developing the tool. The tool was started just with a really little innovation grant with a little team of IT developers on the Gold Coast. And so now that it's being rolled out nationally, we hope that the tool continues to be developed and continues to be useful to general practice in Australia, primary health networks, patients, the wider community. So there is a process if you are interested to get involved. Your PHNs can nominate you if you did want to think about joining the National Clinical Advisory Group. You're on mute.
The joys of technology. Thank you so much to Dr. Beechum for sharing her clinical insights and experience with us all. So I'm going to hand over and discuss the Primary Sense transition launch specifically for Brisbane North PHN. So I'll just give an outline of our region specifically. Within our region, we have 250 practices that will be transitioning between now and April 30, 2023. So we have developed a Primary Sense practice registration checklist, and this checklist registers your general practice and is the first step in the onboarding and installation process for Primary Sense. The checklist will take approximately 5 to 6 minutes to complete, and there are 2 sections. This includes the registration questions itself, and the second includes the Primary Sense workflow that we have developed for general practices. Once you have completed this form, an email will be sent to you with the information regarding the installation process, and an email will be sent which will outline it in its entirety. We are encouraging all practices to complete this registration form as soon as possible, and by completing this form, you are not committing to be immediately onboarded with Primary Sense. You can indicate what month works for you and for your practice between November and April to be onboarded, and we will accommodate this as best as possible. So with our registration process, you just need to click on the link, which I will include in the evaluation form, or I've got a QR code there ready. You need to fill out the checklist itself, and you will receive a confirmation email. So I was discussing that section 2 of the registration form outlines a workflow, so here it is. So the workflow is as followed. The aforementioned registration steps will be completed. Then a new contract, the data sharing agreement, which is built from the endorsed RACGP agreement, will be sent to the practice within 5 days of registering. Once the data sharing agreement is returned, you'll be allocated into your month that you indicated on the registration form. Due to it is on a first first in, first serve basis, there are capped spots per month. And if that month is full, we will allocate you to the next month, but we will do our absolute best to try and get you into the month that you have indicated. We cannot initiate step 3 without the return of the data sharing agreement. So once we have the data sharing agreement, we will work with your IT provider to set up of the installation, and a confidential token ID will be created to automatically, and it will be sent to them to begin the installation process. We are recommending this step to be done within 5 business days of the confidential token ID being generated. And once Primary Sense has been successfully installed, you will receive an email which outlines that Primary Sense is ready to be used, a feedback form on the onboarding and installation process, and training resources to follow. So the last step, which is step 5, is the Brisbane North PHN Quality Improvement and Develop Engagement Officers, which will contact your practice and provide support with meaningful use of Primary Sense and quality improvement activities. So that's just giving a high-level outline of what our workflow is for the registration, onboarding, and installation of Primary Sense. We will be sending through communications and documents and resources once you have registered, a little bit more detail as to what the process involves. And we will step you through each step of the way as well. So some frequently asked questions I've got up here. So what are the components of Primary Sense? Primary Sense has 4 separate components that work together to provide real-time reports and medication alerts. And the 4 components are a data extractor tool, and the extractor is installed on the server of the practice, a desktop app for generating reports and managing alerts, a database that is located in the Azure cloud, and the ACG risk stratification tool located in the Azure cloud. We've had a few questions regarding, will the Primary Sense tool slow down our practice system? Primary Sense has been designed to work in harmony with your IT systems without slowing down the performance. It has been extensively tested with Gold Coast-based practices and found no evidence that it affects practice systems. However, in the unlikely event that that your system does appear to be slower, our technical team can adjust your primary sense settings further. So where is the extracted data stored? The data is de-identified and encrypted when it is extracted before it is forwarded to the database. Extracted de-identified data is stored in the primary sense database, which is located in the cloud-based Microsoft Azure in Australia. Microsoft Azure provides industry standard security and adheres to Australian privacy principles. Do patients know that data is extracted and shared within the PHN, and can they opt out? General practices are required to adhere to privacy principles when sharing de-identified data. Generally, this is included in the patient registration form, and patients can opt out at any time. Primary Sense has a quick and easy opt-out function for this specific purpose. So how is Primary Sense different to other extraction tools? It provides a one-click report, like Dr. Beechum went through, about issues that matter to Gold Coast at the moment, and then our Brisbane North practices. It stratifies your patients into different bands or levels of complexity using the ACG Johns Hopkins risk stratification tool, and it uses real-time data in reports and alerts because it extracts new information every 3 minutes. And lastly, it is owned and managed by the Gold Coast PHN, and the team can quickly respond to the feedback and requests of practices.
Now it's owned by WAPA.
and our team will be responding. So what is patient complexity and what are the levels? There are 6 complexity levels ranging from 0 to 5, and 0 indicates a very low complexity with no known risks for poor health outcomes, while level 5 is the highest. So I'm thinking it's level 5. Patient with level 5 complexity typically has significant multi-morbidity and polypharmacy and are a greater risk at poorer health outcomes. So is this different to our hospitalization risk? Levels reflect that the current care needs of patients, while hospitalization risk identifies estimated future care needs, while patients with higher levels of complexity are more likely to be hospitalized than those of lower levels. Complexity is not directly associated with hospitalization risk, and many primary sense reports therefore include both results. And the last frequently asked question is, how is complexity and hospitalization risk calculated? The same input data is used for both calculations. The complexity levels of patients in primary sense reports were calculated with the adjusted clinical groups, the ACG Johns Hopkins tool, and the ACG tool is underpinned by a robust evidence base of 30+ years of practical application. The tool is used in 20 countries and has been validated in different healthcare systems, including general practice. So I will open the floor for questions. I can see in the Q&A we have one question at the moment. And Dr. Beechum, if you would be okay to answer this one. The first is, can only clinical staff see the prompts, or will admin staff also have access to this?
As far as I'm aware, it's only clinical staff that see the prompts. And so for the clinical prompts, that's the way it's been set up, so that if an RN's logged on, they should be able to see the prompts, and same for doctors. Yeah.
Were there any more questions that anyone would like to pop in the Q&A section of the Zoom function? If there are any more questions, you're more than welcome to pop it in the evaluation form as well. There's a section.
Mm-hmm.
So another question is it compatible with most softwares?
So at the moment, it's compatible with best practice and MD, because I think together they have over 90% market share of software across Australia. There's plans to look at making it compatible with MMX, which I believe the Indigenous organisations in Queensland are currently using. And as time goes on, the plan is to hopefully have it more available for other software vendors.
And Lisa, we've had some questions asking that, just confirming that practice managers, admin staff can access all reports.
Yeah, that's right. So practice managers can, RNs can. I guess you want mainly your clinical staff being able to access it, but also from a business point of view, practice managers can.
And one of the questions was, what training can I sign up to? Will it be reception staff too? It certainly will. Our quality development, our engagement officers will be reaching out once the Primary Sense tool has been installed, and we'll be conducting lunchbox sessions, and we will be asking what kind of topics would our general practitioners and our admin staff and practice managers like to see. So we will be providing training after installation.
Mm-hmm.
So just having a look, that looks like all of the questions that were in the chat. As I said, if there are any further questions that come up, there is an opportunity to enter it in the post-webinar evaluation, or you can email practice support. So that's an option too.
I think the other thing to emphasize is that WAPA WA PHA Alliance has a website that has a collection of materials and also a collection of change management ideas, because I think we all learn off how everyone else does it. You know, each day when I'm watching my registrar see patients, I see them use the software in a different way to me and vice versa. So I think that change management across the whole nation will be exciting as this rolls out to the first wave of PHNs, and being able to have that collaborative approach is going to be important.
So thank you so much to everyone who has attended our Brisbane North PHN Primary Sense Transition launch webinar, and a special thank you to Dr. Beechum.
Thank you.
We are so grateful for the engagement that we have had this evening, and I hope that this webinar has informed you more about Primary Sense tool and then also about our Brisbane North transition. Dr. Beechum, thank you so much for sharing your clinical and practical insights from utilising the tool. We are really lucky to have a GP that has been utilising it for over 3 years now in your general practice. We have an evaluation at the end of this webinar, and if you would like to complete it, that would be greatly appreciated, and it will help inform us of our further Primary Sense transition sessions that we will be providing training for our general practice staff. So if you would like to complete this evaluation, you'll receive a certificate of attendance. Furthermore, the link to the registration form is included, and also the link to the National Primary Sense website, which has a really broad range of resources across different modes as well. So it's absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't already. So thank you so much to everyone for attending, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.